In a prestigious tech company, 58-year-old black cleaning lady Linda Williams was invisible, until Greg Hall, her arrogant manager, made her the target of his relentless cruelty. But when her quiet dignity turned into bold defiance, she uncovered the dark truth behind the company's shiny facade. What happened next would shock even the most seasoned. Let's begin. At Future Corp, the sprawling tech company synonymous with innovation and excellence, the office building gleamed like a beacon of corporate success. Its towering glass facade reflected the morning sun, casting a shimmering light on the surrounding urban landscape. Inside, the offices were a carefully curated picture of modernity: open concept workspaces, high-tech conference rooms, and sleek furnishings designed to impress clients and inspire employees. Amidst this polished environment was Linda Williams, a 58-year-old black cleaning lady whose presence was as constant and steady as the sunrise. Linda had worked at Future Corp for over a decade, starting each day before the first employee arrived and often leaving long after the last executive departed. Her work was thorough and meticulous. Not a speck of dust dared linger under her care. She moved through the office with quiet efficiency, her kind smile and gentle demeanor a stark contrast to the high-pressure world around her. Linda's job was far from glamorous, but she took pride in it. Each gleaming surface and perfectly arranged chair was a testament to her effort and integrity. She knew that while the employees of Future Corp chased ambitious projects and high-stakes deals, they relied on the order she maintained without ever realizing it. Despite her dedication, Linda was often invisible to those around her, a silent presence in the background. Greg Hall, the operations manager, was one such person who rarely noticed her contributions. In his mid-40s, Greg had built a reputation as a no-nonsense leader with a sharp tongue and a penchant for belittling others. His salt-and-pepper hair, always neatly combed, and tailored suits gave him an air of professionalism that masked his volatile temper. Greg saw himself as the backbone of Future Corp, indispensable and untouchable. His inflated ego often blinded him to the importance of those he deemed beneath him. One particularly hectic morning, Greg stormed into the office before most employees had arrived. His leather briefcase swung at his side as he muttered angrily about a delayed report. The tension in his stride was palpable, like a storm cloud rolling through the otherwise calm space. Entering the conference room, he froze mid-step, his gaze landing on Linda, who was diligently wiping down the polished wood table. "Linda!" Greg snapped, his voice slicing through the quiet room like a knife. "Do you always have to move so slow? We're not running a retirement home here." Linda straightened, her hands still clutching the damp cloth. The words stung, but she forced herself to remain composed. She turned toward him, her face calm and steady, though a flicker of hurt crossed her eyes. "I'm doing my best, sir," she replied softly, her voice unwavering despite the tension in the air. Greg scoffed, rolling his eyes in exasperation. "Well, your best isn't enough. We've got clients coming in an hour, and you're still dragging your feet." His tone was laced with disdain, as if her work was not only inadequate, but a personal affront to his schedule. As the exchange unfolded, employees began trickling into the office. They exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the sharpness in Greg's voice. No one dared to intervene or even acknowledge the interaction, instead hurriedly focusing on their screens or shuffling papers to appear busy. Greg's outbursts were not uncommon, and most had learned to keep their heads down when he was in one of his moods. Linda remained quiet, her hands returning to their task, as Greg's cutting words lingered in the air. She didn't respond further, knowing that engaging with him would only escalate the situation. But as she finished cleaning the table and moved on to the next task, something shifted within her. This wasn't the first time Greg had spoken to her this way, but she decided it would be the last. Though Linda's demeanor remained calm on the surface, a resolve began to grow inside her. She would no longer tolerate the disrespect and disregard for her hard work. Greg's words might have silenced the room, but they awakened something powerful in her, a determination to stand up for herself and demand the dignity she deserved. By the end of the day, Linda had resolved to take action. As the office emptied and the hum of activity faded into silence, she stayed behind, just as she always did. But tonight, she wasn't simply scrubbing floors or wiping down desks. With each swish of her cleaning cloth, Linda's mind replayed the countless insults and degrading comments Greg had hurled at her over the past weeks. She sat down at an empty desk, pulled out a notebook from her bag, and began to write. Every snide remark, every dismissive gesture, and every belittling word Greg had thrown her way came flooding back. She documented each incident in careful detail, adding dates and descriptions. It wasn't long before the list grew longer than she expected. She paused occasionally, her hand trembling as she realized how much she had endured. Linda had also overheard whispers from her co-workers, subtle complaints about Greg's temper and arrogance. She wasn't alone. The thought gave her a flicker of courage. She wasn't just speaking out for herself, but for everyone else who had been affected by Greg's behavior. The following morning, Linda awoke early with a sense of purpose. She stood before her closet, selecting her clothes with care. For years, she had worn simple, functional outfits to work, practical and unassuming. But today was different. She chose a blazer she rarely wore, its clean lines giving her an air of quiet authority. As she straightened her shoulders in the mirror, she reminded herself that her voice mattered. On her way to work, Linda made a stop at a nearby cafe. There, she printed out her handwritten notes and typed up a formal letter addressed to David Carter, Future Corp's CEO. David was known for his open-door policy, a rare trait in a company of this size. Few employees had the nerve to approach him directly, but Linda didn't have the luxury of hesitation. She had nothing to lose. Arriving at the office, Linda sought out David's assistant, a polite but brisk woman named Evelyn. "I need to speak with Mr. Carter," Linda said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "It's an urgent workplace matter." Evelyn looked up, her surprise evident. Linda's position in the company was likely not one Evelyn would expect to make such a request. But something in Linda's tone must have conveyed the gravity of the situation. Evelyn nodded, typing a few notes into her computer before scheduling a meeting for that afternoon. At 2 p.m., Linda found herself seated across from David Carter in his sleek, minimalist office. The room was stark yet elegant, with a floor-to-ceiling window offering a panoramic view of the city. David, a man in his early 50s with a calm, measured demeanor, sat behind a pristine glass desk. He studied Linda with curiosity as she handed him her letter and the printed documentation. For a moment, there was only the sound of rustling papers as he read through the details. His brow furrowed slightly, and Linda's heart pounded as she waited for his response. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Ms. Williams," David said at last, setting the papers down. His tone was firm but considerate. "This is troubling, and I assure you it will be taken seriously. I'll need to follow up with HR and speak to the relevant parties." Linda nodded, the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. "I appreciate you listening, Mr. Carter," she said quietly. "You've shown a great deal of courage in coming forward," David replied. "We'll look into this thoroughly." As Linda left the meeting, she felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. She had taken a step she never imagined she'd take, speaking directly to the CEO about something so deeply personal. She had spoken her truth, and now all she could do was wait and hope that her voice would bring about the change she and her colleagues deserved. Word spread quickly that an internal investigation had been launched. Employees were discreetly interviewed, and many shared their own experiences of Greg's volatile behavior. Secretaries, interns, even senior staff all had stories of his temper and arrogance. Linda's courage had opened the floodgates, and for the first time, the employees of Future Corp felt like their voices mattered. Greg, oblivious to the storm brewing around him, continued to bark orders and treat everyone as though they were beneath him. He seemed to notice something was amiss when his meetings with upper management grew tense, and his once friendly peers started avoiding him in the break room. "Do you think this is about the cleaning lady?" Greg scoffed one day, noticing the sidelong glances. "Ridiculous." But the HR department didn't think it was ridiculous. After weeks of interviews and reviewing written complaints, they compiled a damning report that reached David Carter's desk. One bright Monday morning, the entire office buzzed with rumors. Linda arrived at her usual time, quietly setting up her supplies when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see David Carter. "Good morning, Linda," he said warmly. "I wanted you to know that we've concluded the investigation." Linda looked up, her heart pounding. "Greg Hall has been terminated, effective immediately. We've also updated our workplace conduct policies to ensure nothing like this happens again." Linda nodded, feeling a wave of emotions she couldn't quite name. Relief, validation, gratitude. The news spread quickly. Employees whispered in hushed tones as Greg's office was emptied. For the first time in years, the office felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted. Linda didn't gloat or seek recognition. She returned to her work, quietly, but with her head held high. The next day, she found a handwritten note on her desk from one of the younger interns. It read, "Thank you for standing up. You made this a better place for all of us." Linda smiled to herself. She may have been underestimated, but she had proven that strength didn't require a loud voice, only a determined heart.